All right, scholars, we are on cycle 3. Cycle 3, we are going to read this article about memory. So as I read this, I want you to follow along. And please take notes as we go on what seems like it might be important. Excerpt from The Invisible Gorilla by Christopher Chabris and Daniel Simmons. The book The Invisible Gorilla is by two psychologists who explain that our minds don't work that way we think they do. In this section, they're explaining how people believe memory works. The illusion, an illusion is something false or unreal that appears to be true, of memory refers to the disconnect between how we think memory works and how it actually works. But how exactly do we think it works? In a national survey, we included several questions designed to probe means to investigate thoroughly, how people think memory works. Nearly half, or 47% of the respondents, believe that once you've experimented an event and formed a memory of it, that memory doesn't change. An even greater percentage, 63%, believe that human memory works like a video camera, accurately recording the events we see and hear so that we can review and inspect them later. The illusion of memory reflects a basic contrast or difference between what we think we remember and what we actually remember. So, in other words, what we remember is different from what we think we remember. Now, we'd like you to try to recall all the words from the list you read in your Do Now. Do your best to recall as many as you can. And I want you to write them below, so write down here. Pause the video if you need time. What could be simpler than recalling a list of words you read only moments ago? Not much, but even a task as simple as this reveals distortions. Distortions means something that's inaccurate in memory. Look at the list you wrote down. How do you think you did? Most likely you didn't recall all 15 words. When we use this task as a classroom demonstration, most students recall a few words from the beginning of the list and a few from the end of the list. Stop to think about this for a moment. Those words were all utterly common and familiar. You were not under any special stress, we hope, when you read them, and there was no time pressure to recall them. Computers built in the 1950s were able to perfectly store 15 words in memory. But despite our magnificent mental abilities, we cannot remember with precision. Precision is accuracy or exactness. What we read just minutes ago. We're going to continue. Please continue to follow along. The reason your difficulty recalling all 15 words in our list illustrates the illusion of memory is not that it reveals limits on how much we can remember. People generally understand those limits. It reflects the illusion of memory because it highlights how we remember what we do. Take a look at the list you recalled. Does it contain the word sleep? About 40% of people reading this book will recall having seen the word sleep. If you are one of those people, you are probably as confident about having seen sleep as you are about any of the other words you remembered. You might even have a distinct recollection or remember it really clearly seeing it on the list, but it wasn't there. You fabricated it. Fabricated means invented it. So there's that invention of memory that Max talks about. Memory depends both on what actually happened and how we made sense of what happened. Your mind automatically makes sense of and processes the connections between the things you are trying to remember. The list you read was designed to produce just this sort of false memory. All of the words are closely associated with the missing word sleep. As you read the words on the list, your mind made sense of them, automatically processing the connections among them. At some level, you knew that they were all related to sleep, but you didn't take a special note on that fact, that sleep was not on the list. Then, when you recalled the words, your mind reconstructed the list as best it could based on both your specific memory for the words you sought and on your knowledge of how the words were generally related. When we perceive means to experience through our senses. So when we perceive something, we extract the meaning from what we see, or hear, or smell, rather than record everything in perfect detail. Memory doesn't store everything we perceive, but instead takes what we have seen or heard and associates it or makes connections with what we already know. These associations help us to discern what is important and to recall details about what we've seen. They provide retrieval clues that make our memory more fluent. In most cases, such cues are helpful, but these associations or connections can also lead us astray precisely because they lead to an inflated sense of the precision of memory. So we think we know, we remember more than we really do. We cannot easily distinguish or pick between what we call verbatim, which is word for word, and what we created based on associations and knowledge. So we don't remember what is actually true and what we made up because it helps us remember. People often remember what they expect to remember. What is stored in memory is not an exact replica of reality, but a recreation of it. We cannot play back our memories like a DVD or like a YouTube video each time we recall a memory. We integrate whatever details we do remember with our expectations for what we should remember. So I want you to also think back to what happened on your first day of school, what you wore, who you talked to, what you saw. And what you remember might not actually be exactly what happened. We remember what we expect to remember. So if you need to scroll back up, we're going to answer this first question. What is the illusion of memory? It says it on the first part of this article. Write it down there. Pause the video. We are going to read this excerpt of from the first chapter of our book. It says, looking sort of fierce is how I remember him, except later it was Freak himself who taught me that remembering is a great invention of the mind. And if you try hard enough to remember anything, whether it really happened or not. So maybe he wasn't really all that fierce in daycare, except I'm pretty sure he did hit a kid with his crutch once. Whacked a little brat pretty good. So how would Chabris and Simons, the authors of The Invisible Gorilla, the article we just read, uh, agree with Freak that remembering is a great invention of the mind? Why or why not? So would they agree? Why or why not? Pause the video and answer that. Our next question. Chabris and Simons write, people remember what they expect to remember. Why might Max remember Freak as looking sort of fierce in daycare? What would be the reason behind that? And then moving on, we're going to read this excerpt from what we just read from page 15. Why might Max be pretty sure he remembers Freak sitting in the wagon, happy as can be? And then consider the phrase, like Freak says later in this book. What's unique about this statement, and what might it be foreshadowing? Foreshadowing means it gives us a hint to what comes later. How might that give us a hint to what comes later? What's unique about it? When you're done, move on to the summative writing.